When it comes to this 2016 NFL draft class for quarterbacks, I think there's a pretty solid consensus that the top three guys in some type of configuration or order, and pretty much everybody's board, is Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Paxton Lynch. Like, those are the top three guys. That's the clearly established beginning point hierarchy for the position for the class this year. And then after that, I don't know if there's a general consensus. I think everybody has different things that they value out of the position, different things that they see out of different prospects. The next set of guys might be guys like Hackenberg and Connor Cook and Cardell Jones, which might just be in part based off of college reputation as much as it is film reality in their projections to the NFL level. Now, for me, as I've went through and evaluated this draft class of quarterbacks, it's been striking to me the drop off in talent, in my opinion, after those top three guys. And I really don't think once you get from after the top three, pick quarterbacks 4 to maybe quarterbacks 8 or 9. I don't really think there's a whole lot of difference there. There is some difference, yes. But I think it might be surprising to some of you who I grade out as those 4th and 5th best quarterbacks in this draft class. And today I'm here to talk about the guy that is sitting number 5 on my quarterback board for the 2016 NFL draft, and that is Jacob Coker. I know, you're probably surprised. Frankly, as I was beginning the evaluation of him and as I kept watching him, I was as surprised as anybody. I always thought there was a chance that maybe he would get drafted at some point in time because of his size and because of some of the NFL tools. But as I started to watch him more and more, I saw a guy that maybe with some work, with some development time in the right system, could develop into at least an average to solid, dependable starting quarterback at the NFL level. I know, call me crazy. But you look at him, he's 6'5", 230 pounds. You're talking about a guy with very good size for the position, not just height, but he's got a decent build. So he looks like, in terms of a frame standpoint, he can hold up at the NFL level. Doesn't need to spend a lot of additional time in the weight room to prepare himself to have an NFL body. He already has one. A guy with pretty good arm strength, not the strongest arm in the draft, but more than enough arm strength to make all the required NFL throws, and in particular stretch out opposing defenses straight down the field vertically. A really good thrower of the deep ball. In fact, I think that's one of his biggest attributes of a positive sense that he brings to the table to go along with that arm strength. Is not only can he throw the ball 50 to 60 yards down the field, and you saw this many times at Alabama in 2015, but he can also do it with very good touch and very good accuracy. His deep ball accuracy alone gives him a chance to me to stick as a quarterback in the NFL because he could do things throwing the deep ball that other quarterbacks just dream of and try to imagine. But you look at him and you say 6'5", 230 pounds, so he's probably a stiff weight in the pocket, and he's not. He's a guy that can move. I think his athleticism is a little bit underrated, and his mobility in particular is underrated, especially his ability to scramble out and throw on the move and sometimes pick up yardage with his feet. You watch him, and it wasn't always necessarily pretty, but he could get the job done, and there were times where Coker kept the play alive in the pocket a lot longer than maybe he should have been able to, and was able to make things happen where other lesser quarterbacks wouldn't have been able to. It would have been something if you expected a Blake Sims to do this in 2014 for Alabama, because this was more of his game, you thought, in theory. But Jacob Coker was able to make some big plays happen and extend some plays because of his feet and his ability to move on his feet. It would surprise you when you watch him on film. And I look at his mechanics, too, and I thought his mechanics overall were solid. I think his throwing motion can get a little long, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But you look at him, and he just passes the eyeball test. And you see a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience as a starting quarterback, but he made his experience count in 2015, leading the Crimson Tide to the national championship, and I thought playing well in some big games for the Crimson Tide. He was a guy that took relatively good care of the football, so if anything else, maybe he strikes you as the type of guy you put in as a starter that you can win games with, but not because of, who occasionally may be able to have a big game here and there because of his ability to throw the ball deep with accuracy. As I watched him more and more, I liked what I saw. And it started to make me think that, hey, maybe I'm not so crazy for thinking he's a top 5 quarterback prospect in this draft. Now, sure, he has some questions. I think his accuracy at times in the short and intermediate game leaves a little bit to be desired. It's not like he's wild and all over the place, but it could be better. In particular, his ball placement. He does a good job, I think, of getting the ball in general into his receiver's catch radius. But ball placement can be important. At times where you need to throw it up here, are you throwing it back here? At times where you need to throw it here, are you throwing it down here? Are you throwing it over there? Are you leading your receivers, or are you sitting there and throwing it behind them where they have to stop and lose their momentum and lose their speed that they had built up? And at times I thought he was a little lacking in terms of his overall ball placement. I talked before about the length in his throwing motion. It's something I would like to see him tighten up, because he does have a naturally strong arm and he can make all the NFL throws, but that could be somewhat mitigated with the length of his arm utilization in his throwing motion. I think he does a good job in general, especially in the pocket, of utilizing his lower body in the throwing motion, which masks some of the deficiencies that come from that length in the throwing motion in terms of losing velocity. But when you talk about the NFL, those throwing windows get even smaller, and they last for an even smaller period of time. And every little tenth or hundredth of a second you spend winding up and throwing the ball is another opportunity for a defensive back or linebacker to break up the pass, if not pick you off. So I would like to see him shorten up his throwing motion a little bit. The fundamentals can be there. The ability to do that can be there, but I would like to see him get better in that area. As with his field vision as well, I think a lot with Alabama, he was asked to just be a primarily one read and throw type of guy, making your reads before the snap, which is okay, but you'd like to see him be able to use his eyes more and be able to go through his progressions. He did that at times, but not necessarily on a consistent basis. I also talked about his experience, too. This is a guy that started off his career at Florida State. He couldn't beat out Jameis Winston, so he had to transfer. Then he comes to Alabama, and then he gets beat out by Blake Sims when you thought he was going to be the dude. And then even early on in 2015, he was getting benched for another dude. Not a lot of game experience. When he did play in 2015, especially as the season progressed, he ultimately made those games count. But again, not a ton of experience, which is especially concerning because you're talking about a guy that's going to be 24 in August. So he's a bit of an older quarterback prospect. How high of a pick would you want to invest in a guy that is going to be 24 in his rookie campaign that is still relatively raw, let's face it, and lacks a lot of experience? I think that is a very interesting and compelling question that teams are ultimately going to have to answer when it comes to where they place him on their board and where they're going to be comfortable utilizing a draft pick on him. When I look at Jacob Coker, though, I see a guy, that has the tools and can be an NFL starting quarterback. Some people might say, well, what about an A.J. McCarron? An A.J. McCarron hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities, but I think he showed well at moments last year with Cincinnati, other moments not so well. But I don't think he played that particularly poorly in the playoff game, if we're being so honest. I look at Jacob Coker as being that type of guy that you could bring in the fourth round, maybe fifth round or so, and you feel pretty confident that at least, if anything else, you've got a solid backup in the wings, and maybe he could end up being a starting quarterback. In terms of an NFL comparison, I don't really know. I didn't really think much about an NFL comparison for him because I didn't want to say somebody that was way too good and way above where he actually is in terms of his NFL reality. But I didn't want to sit there and really undershoot him or undersell him either, if that makes sense. I don't know if it does or not. It is what it is, in my opinion. But I look at him and I just see a guy, in my opinion, that is worth maybe a fourth-round pick in this draft. I've got him graded higher than Christian Hackenberg because I like some of the mental intangibles he has more than Hackenberg, and I like some of the tools that he has better than Hackenberg in terms of what I actually saw in 2015 on film. I've got him graded higher than Cardale Jones. I've got him graded higher than Connor Cook, which may surprise a lot of you. But maybe for some of you it doesn't. Now, like I said, there are a lot of names in this 2016 NFL draft when it comes to the quarterback class, but not a lot of clear-cut, top-flight type of talent. And in my opinion, again, once you get past those top three guys, it really becomes a bit of a crapshoot because there's a lot of similarity and there's a lot of closeness in terms of where they could go. And I think when it comes to Jacob Coker, teams are going to look at his size, look at some of the NFL tools that he has, and I think he will surprise you with where he could potentially end up being drafted. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he ended up being a fourth-round pick and somebody took a flyer on him, and they probably should. Maybe he's somebody like a Bryce Petty. He was a fourth-round pick last year for the Jets. Jacob Coker's draft stock to me is somewhat similar, but I like him. Like I said, in terms of guys that I think could have a chance to be a starter at some point, at some time at the NFL level, he's one of those guys that I throw into this category out of this year's quarterback draft class. Call me crazy, I know, but again, I think he's a top 5 quarterback in the 2016 NFL draft.